Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a monumental subject, the history of Israel, stretching from way back in prehistoric times right up to the present day.
It's a huge sweep of history, definitely.
Exactly. And we know this is vast. So our aim isn't, to cover every single detail in the next hour. It's more about pulling out the crucial threads, grasping the major movements and transformations.
Getting a real sense of the journey.
Right. Giving you a shortcut, sort of, to feeling well-informed without drowning in dates and names. Our main source today is a really comprehensive Wikipedia article. It's a mountain of information, honestly.
And our job is to kind of distill that,
Yeah,
find those key moments, those empires, the events that really shaped this land.
precisely. With such a broad scope, the challenge, and I guess the reward too, is identifying those turning points and understanding their lasting impact.
We're looking for that essential framework, not necessarily every single detail along the way.
Okay, so let's dive in right at the beginning. The source takes us way back, before 4500 BCE to the Stone Age. What are the earliest key developments here?
Well, it's that fundamental shift, from nomadic hunter-gatherers to more settled communities, people starting agriculture, domesticating animals. It's a huge step in human history, and it happened here too.
Right, the basics of civilization starting to form. Okay, moving forward, like thousands of years, we hit the late Bronze Age, roughly 1550 to 1200 BCE. This feels a bit more defined,
It is. You have Canaanite city-states, but they're mostly what we call vassal states.
meaning they're under someone else's thumb.
Pretty much. In this case, the New Kingdom of Egypt ruling from Gaza. There's a major event mentioned, the Battle of Megiddo, around 1457 BCE. That's Pharaoh Thutmose III, basically putting down a Canaanite rebellion.
Already showing its strategic importance then, this land bridge idea.
Absolutely. Key corridor between major powers, even back then.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The source talks about the late Bronze Age collapse. Sounds dramatic. What was going on?
It was dramatic, a period of massive upheaval across the whole Eastern Mediterranean, really.
Hmm.
Cities damaged, destroyed, trade routes fractured, Egyptian power faded out.
And new groups emerge from this chaos.
Exactly. Two key groups pop up as we transition into the Iron Age. The Sea Peoples, the Philistines are the most famous of those, settling the southern coast, and the Israelites, who start appearing more in the Central Highlands.
And this isn't just about iron tools replacing bronze, is it? The source quotes someone, Mark Smith, suggesting there's actually a lot of cultural overlap between the early Israelites and Canaanites.
That's a really crucial point. The archaeology suggests continuity. It wasn't like the Israelites just arrived fully formed and completely separate. It seems more like their culture developed out of the existing Canaanite context.
Challenging some later narratives, maybe?
It definitely adds nuance to the idea of a sharp, immediate separation, more of a gradual emergence of a distinct identity. Okay, then we move into the Iron Age 2. Around the 10th century BCE, this is where we get the Israelite kingdoms, Judah and Israel, and some big historical debates, right? Especially about a united monarchy.
Oh, absolutely. The whole Saul, David, Solomon narrative. The Hebrew Bible describes this powerful, unified kingdom, Solomon's temple. But archaeologically, it's debated.
You have different camps.
Yeah, sort of. You get the maximalists who see archaeological evidence supporting the biblical account, and minimalists who argue that if it existed, it was likely smaller, maybe less centralized than the text suggests.
The source mentions a couple of key pieces of evidence here. There's the Teldan stele.
Right, from the 9th century BCE. It's significant because it's the earliest non-biblical reference found so far to the House of David.
And Khirbet Kiafa.
That's a fortified city, potentially early 10th century, overlooking the Elah Valley. Some archaeologists connect it to David's early kingdom, but again, it's part of that ongoing discussion.
So the debate continues, but what's the general consensus on the kingdoms existing at all? Well, there's a pretty broad agreement that the northern kingdom of Israel was definitely a thing by around 900 BCE, and the southern kingdom of Judah by about 850 BCE.
And these two kingdoms were different.
Quite different, yeah. The northern kingdom, Israel, seems to have been larger, maybe more prosperous initially. Think of the Omride dynasty. Their capital at Samaria was impressive.
But Judah, the southern kingdom,
Smaller, centered on Jerusalem, ruled by the Davidic dynasty. Maybe less powerful day to day, but it proved more stable over the long run, it seems.
until the Assyrians show up, their rise changed everything, didn't it?
Completely. Starting around 732 BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire starts pushing hard into the region. The northern kingdom, Israel, held out for a while, but Samaria eventually fell around 720 BCE after a long siege.
And the Assyrians had this policy of deportation.
Yes, a brutal but effective tactic. Sargon II's records claim over 27,000 people were deported from Samaria to Mesopotamia. This is the historical event behind the idea of the 10 lost tribes.
And they moved other people in.
Right. They resettled conquered territories with people from other parts of their empire. This mixing is really important.
Because this leads to the Samaritans.
That's their traditional origin story, yes. They claim descent from the Israelites who weren't exiled, who stayed and mixed with these incoming populations. It created a distinct identity and later religious differences with Judeans.
Judah survived that initial Assyrian wave, but not forever. It ended up tangled with the next big power, Babylon.
That's right. Judah became a vassal state of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But then King Jehoiakim, against advice, allied with Egypt. Big mistake.
So Babylon comes knocking.
Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem in 597 BCE. He captured the city, looted it, and deported the king Jeconiah, along with thousands of the elite, craftsmen, etc., to Babylon. He installed a puppet king, Zedekiah.
Which also ended badly, leading to the temple's destruction later. But this Babylonian exile, though devastating, wasn't the absolute end. The Persians arrived next.
Yes, a major turning point. Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon in 538 BCE, and Cyrus had a different policy.
Religious freedom, allowing people to go home.
Famously, yes. His decree allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. The source mentions Zerubbabel leading a large group back, and the second temple was finished around 515 BCE.
And there were later waves, with Ezra and Nehemiah focusing on restoring the walls and the community's religious life.
Exactly. The region became the Persian province of Yehud and stayed that way until Alexander the Great swept through in 332 BCE.
The source also mentions something about a Jewish garrison in Egypt, Elephantine.
Ah, yes, the Elephantine Papyri. Fascinating discovery. It shows a Judean military colony existed there under Persian rule, giving us glimpses into their daily life and religious practices, like how they observed Passover, even far from Jerusalem. Shows the diaspora was already developing.
Okay, so Alexander arrives, 332 BCE, start of the Hellenistic period. What happens after he dies?
His empire breaks up. Judea ends up caught between two successor kingdoms, the Ptolemies based in Egypt and the Seleucids based in Syria.
Who controls it first?
The Ptolemies, for about a century. Things seem relatively stable, but then the Seleucids take over around 200 BCE.
And things change.
Gradually, yes. The Seleucids initially respected local customs, but the push towards Hellenization, adopting Greek culture, language practices, increased. This created serious tension within Judea.
Between those who embraced Greek ways and those who resisted.
Intricately. It became a major internal conflict, especially over the position of high priest. And it all boiled over under Antiochus V's Epiphanes.
He's the one who desecrated the temple.
Yes, that was the final straw for many. His actions directly challenged fundamental Jewish religious beliefs and practices, sparking the Maccabean revolt in the 160s BCE.
And this revolt actually led to a period of renewed Jewish independence.
Remarkably, yes. Led by Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, they fought off the Seleucids and eventually established the Hasmonean dynasty.
How independent were they?
It evolved. Under leaders like John Hyrcanus, they achieved full independence and expanded their territories significantly. They conquered Idumea, as we mentioned, forced conversions, pushed into Samaria, even demolished the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim.
So they became quite powerful.
They did. Under Aristobulus of Phae and Alexander Gennaeus, it became a full-fledged kingdom, controlling the coast, Galilee, parts of Transjordan. Some scholars even think the final version of the Hebrew Bible might have been solidified during this time.
But, a new power is rising in the West. Rome.
Indeed. Internal squabbling within the Hasmonean family gave Rome the perfect excuse to intervene. In 63 BCE, Pompey the Great arrives, takes Jerusalem, and essentially ends Hasmonean independence. Judea becomes a Roman client state.
And this leads to the Herodian dynasty.
Yes, Rome eventually installed Herod the Great as king. He was loyal to Rome, a brilliant builder. The temple expansion was his project, really impressive, but also known for, well, brutality and heavy taxes.
Which didn't exactly endear him to the population.
Not at all. There was a lot of resentment bubbling beneath the surface. After he died, his kingdom was split among his sons, a tetrarchy under Roman supervision. And eventually, in 6 CE, Judea itself became a proper Roman province, ruled directly by a Roman governor.
And direct Roman rule, how did that go?
Not well, overall. The source points to a cycle of often corrupt or incompetent governors, economic hardship, ethnic and religious friction. Plus, the memory of the Maccabean independence was still there, fueling hopes of liberation.
Which eventually leads to the Jewish-Roman Wars.
Tragically, yes. Two major, devastating revolts. The first, from 66-73 CE, ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE. Catastrophic.
Oh, the second.
The Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132-136 CE, also crushed, with immense loss of life. After this, the Romans banned Jews from living in or near Jerusalem, rebuilt it as a Roman city called Aelia Capitolina, and renamed the province Syria Palestina.
Trying to erase the connection.
It seems like a deliberate attempt to sever the Jewish link to the land, yes. These wars were a watershed moment. They massively increased the Jewish diaspora communities outside the land and shifted the demographic and cultural centers.
Where did they shift to?
Galilee became a major center within the land, and Babylonia became increasingly important outside it. This is where key texts like the Mishnah and the Jerusalem Talmud were compiled, mainly in Galilee.
So Jewish life and scholarship continued, but the landscape had fundamentally changed.
Absolutely. The Nasi, or patriarch, became an important leader liaising with Roman authorities. But Judea itself saw a decline in Jewish population, while migration to the diaspora, especially towards the more tolerant Persian Empire, continued, particularly during economic hard times in the 3rd century.
And then the Roman Empire itself transformed, becoming Christian, leading into the Byzantine period from about 390 CE.
Right. Christianity becomes the official religion, which obviously increased its influence in the Holy Land under Byzantine rule. Another layer added to the region's complex religious identity.
This Byzantine dominance lasted until the 7th century, when a completely new force emerged.
Islam. The early Muslim conquests swept through the Levant, taking the region from the Byzantines. Rule passed through different caliphates: Rashidun, Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid, and eventually the Seljuk Turks.
And this period saw major Islamic construction in Jerusalem.
Yes, iconic structures. The Dome of the Rock was completed around 691, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque around 705, both built on the Temple Mount, a site already deeply significant.
We hear about the Islamic Golden Age under the Abbasids. Was it a good time for non-Muslims?
It was a time of incredible intellectual and scientific flourishing, yes, but for non-Muslims it varied. There were definitely periods of tolerance, but also times with discriminatory rules, special taxes like the jizya, sometimes rules about clothing. It wasn't uniform.
Then comes another huge upheaval, the Crusades.
Right, starting in the late 11th century. A series of wars, basically. European Christians trying to wrest control of the Holy Land from Muslim rulers.
They established the Kingdom of Jerusalem for a time.
They did, for much of the 12th century. But it was eventually largely conquered by Saladin and his Ayyubid forces later that century.
Saladin. The source mentions his physician was Maimonides.
That's right, the great Jewish philosopher and scholar. He'd actually fled persecution himself from Muslim Spain. It shows the complex interactions of the time. There were later crusades, brief periods of Christian control, like through a treaty in 1229, but Muslim powers largely held sway.
After the Ayyubids, who takes over?
The Mamluks, a powerful sultanate based in Egypt. They ruled the area from about 1250 until 1516.
Weren't they the ones who stopped the Mongols?
Yes, famously at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, a crucial victory. Under the Mamluks, the last Crusader strongholds fell by 1291. They also apparently placed some restrictions on Jewish worship at certain sites, like Hebron.
And their rule lasted until the early 16th century.
Correct. Then came another major power shift. The Ottoman Turks conquered the region in 1516-17.
And the Ottomans stayed for a long time.
4 centuries. The land became part of Ottoman Syria. A long period of relative stability, though with its own dynamics.
Did Jewish life continue under the Ottomans?
Yes, definitely. You have the continuation of the old Yishuv, the pre-Zionist Jewish community, and there was ongoing immigration, notably Sephardic Jews arriving after being expelled from Spain in 1492.
The source mentions Napoleon showing up briefly, and Muhammad Ali of Egypt.
Right. Napoleon's campaign in 1799 was short-lived, but his proclamation about a Jewish state, even if shelved, was significant. Muhammad Ali controlled the area for a decade in the 1830s. By the mid-19th century, Jews were actually the largest single group in Jerusalem itself, though Muslims remained the majority in Palestine overall.
This leads us towards the modern era. Late 19th century sees the birth of Zionism.
As a formal political movement, yes. And the first Aliyah, the first major wave of Zionist immigration, starting around 1882.
What was driving this?
Primarily worsening persecution in Europe, especially the violent pogroms in the Russian Empire. The idea of establishing a secure Jewish national home gained urgency.
Then comes World War I, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the British step in.
Yes. Britain is granted the mandate for Palestine by the League of Nations. And crucially, in 1917, even before the war ended, they issue the Balfour Declaration.
Which promised British support for a Jewish national home in Palestine, huge for Zionists.
Monumental, but also immediately controversial, as the Arab population saw it as undermining their own rights and aspirations for the land. This set the stage for escalating conflict.
And Jewish immigration continued, even accelerated between the wars.
Yes, several more Aliyat waves of immigration, driven by ongoing anti-Semitism in Europe, pogroms in places like Poland after WWI, the rise of Nazism in Germany. The U.S. also had restrictive immigration laws, pushing people towards Palestine.
This is when we see things like the kibbutzim developing.
Right, the collective agricultural settlements became a key feature. But tensions kept rising. There were serious clashes, riots in 1920 and 1921, leading the Jewish community to form defense groups like the Haganah.
The British were caught in the middle, trying to manage these conflicting promises.
Exactly. The mandate had this inherent contradiction: foster a Jewish national home and protect the rights of the existing Arab population, preparing them for self-government. It became increasingly impossible.
Things really flared up in the late 1930s.
The Arab Revolt of 1936–39 was a major uprising against both British rule and Jewish immigration. The British response included the Peel Commission, which actually proposed partitioning the land,
How did that go down?
rejected by the Arab leadership. Then, in 1939, on the eve of WWII, the British issued a white paper severely restricting Jewish immigration and proposing an independent Palestine with an Arab majority within 10 years. That was rejected by both sides.
And this restriction led to illegal immigration attempts, Aliyah bet.
Yes, trying to get Jews, especially those fleeing the Nazis, into Palestine despite the British blockade. Then came World War II and the Holocaust.
Which must have intensified the desire for a Jewish state incredibly.
Immensely. After the war, the pressure ramped up. The Brisha movement organized mass illegal immigration of Holocaust survivors. Many were intercepted by the British and interned, often in camps on Cyprus. More radical Jewish underground groups like the Sturm Gang also emerged.
The situation seemed untenable. What happened next?
Britain basically handed the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan, Resolution 181.
Dividing Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem internationalized.
That was the idea. The Jewish leadership accepted it, despite reservations. The Arab leadership and Arab states rejected it outright.
And rejection meant
War. It immediately triggered a civil war between the Jewish and Arab communities within Palestine, even before the British mandate officially ended.
And when the mandate did end, in May 1948,
David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel. Immediately, armies from neighboring Arab states invaded.
this is the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
Yes. Israel managed to repel the invasions and even expand the territory allocated under the UN plan. But the war also resulted in the displacement and flight of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, the Nakba, or catastrophe.
And at the same time, Jews were leaving Arab countries.
Yes, large-scale Jewish immigration, sometimes expulsion, from Middle Eastern and North African countries to Israel occurred in the following years. It dramatically changed the demographics both in Israel and across the region. Today, something like 43% of the world's Jewish population lives in Israel.
So the state is established. What were the early years like?
Intense. Establishing institutions like the Knesset, holding the first elections, Mapai, the Labor Party under Ben-Gurion, dominated early on. Massive immigration meant austerity measures, rationing, and this whole melting pot idea of forging a unified Israeli identity from diverse origins.
Foreign policy.
Initially, they tried non-alignment in the Cold War, but circumstances and conflicts gradually pushed Israel closer to the West.
And there were more conflicts, the Suez Crisis in '56.
Right. Then the Six-Day War in 1967, which was transformative. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. UN Resolution 242 called for withdrawal from territories occupied, but its interpretation is still debated.
Then the Yom Kippur War in '73.
A surprise attack that shook Israel, though they ultimately repelled it. But these wars were punctuated by attempts at peace, too.
Like the Camp David Accords with Egypt.
A huge breakthrough in 1979. The first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation, followed much later by the peace treaty with Jordan in 1994 and the Oslo Accords with the PLO in 1993.
Oslo seemed promising, but didn't lead to lasting peace.
No, unfortunately. Despite those efforts, the core conflict remained unresolved.
What about major internal events during these decades?
The Eichmann trial in the early 60s was hugely significant, bringing the Holocaust into sharp focus. There were various social protests over the years, Mizrahi Jews protesting discrimination in the 70s, big housing protests in 2011. These reflected internal tensions and debates.
Then the second intifada in the early 2000s.
Yes, a period of intense violence from 2000 to around 2005. This led Israel to construct the controversial West Bank barrier and, in 2005, to unilaterally withdraw its settlements and military from the Gaza Strip.
Which was followed by Hamas taking control of Gaza.
In 2006-2007, yes, after winning elections and a brief conflict with Fatah. This created a new dynamic, with Gaza effectively blockaded by Israel and Egypt.
And in more recent years?
We've seen recurring conflicts between Israel and Hamas in Gaza Operation Pillar of Defense, Protective Edge, and others. Also, the Abraham Accords normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab nations like the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco.
Yeah, a significant diplomatic shift.
Definitely. Alongside that, you've had considerable political turbulence within Israel itself, multiple elections, shifting coalition governments, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic impacted everyone.
And tragically, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues, with serious violence flaring up again in 2023 and heightened regional tensions, like the direct clashes with Iran in April 2024.
It underscores how interconnected everything is. The local conflict, regional rivalries, internal politics. The situation remains incredibly complex and volatile.
So as we kind of wrap up this whirlwind tour through millennia, what are the big takeaways for you, the overarching themes?
Wow. Resilience, I think.
Yeah.
The resilience of the people connected to this land through countless empires, transformations, disasters, also the sheer layers of history here. Everything builds on what came before.
The interplay of cultures, conflicts, faiths.
Exactly, and how that constant interplay has shaped the present in such profound ways. You see the enduring power of identity, the immense challenges of coexistence in a place sacred to so many, and this persistent, often heartbreaking quest for peace and security.
It really is an incredibly layered and complex history, isn't it? And one that feels very much alive, constantly shaping today's events.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about how the past isn't really past, maybe the most compelling thought is how those ancient echoes, the struggles, the aspirations, the connections to the land are still resonating so powerfully in the lives of people there right now, making history not just a subject to study, but a force that continues to mold the world we live in.